When you end up making an all-time classic movie, there's a more than insignificant chance that the sequel will happen. This can be something that happens almost immediately, like the Friday the 13th or Saw franchises, or it can be part of this new breed of legacy sequels that occur 20, 30, or even 40 years after their original entries. Both of these can work with the immediacy of striking while the iron is hot and following trends, or being patient and tugging on the public's nostalgia strings by bringing out the original actors and creative team. What doesn't work usually is what The Descent Part 2 did with the original creator Neil Marshall stepping aside and the movie releasing 4 years after the original. It already had an uphill battle going against the first movie's powerhouse out-of-nowhere showing, and it's admittedly not as good. It either gets outright ignored or openly hated by most who discuss it. Sounds to me like The Descent Part 2 is black sheep material. The first Descent was released in 2005, and I remember going to see it with my coworker and friend Kevin Johnston after we closed Blockbuster for the night. It was late at night, far later than I can usually make it to movies 3 kids and 20 years after, but the movie instantly grabbed me, and even at 20 years old, I had a hard time sleeping that night. I'm not even claustrophobic, just afraid of being devoured by blind cave creatures in an unidentified part of the US, so I can imagine that only adds to it. I got the DVD and explored all the special features and the alternate ending too. The original ending has Sarah, our final girl and main character, waking up to a hallucination of her daughter instead of actually escaping. It's a great and dour ending that plays with all the other dreams and hallucinations she has throughout the movie. The other ending, the one that works for the purposes of having a sequel, just doesn't have the impact or ferocity that the downer one brings to the table. Neil Marshall, the director of the first film, didn't want to write or direct the sequel, so he stepped into a producer role. Enter editor John Harris. I don't just mean that he's an editor in general, although he has been Oscar nominated and done nearly 50 films, including stuff as recently as this year with the James McAvoy remake of Speak No Evil. John Harris was also the editor on The Descent for Neil Marshall, so not only did he know this world and characters, but that movie has incredible edits. One of the original script ideas was to flip the original movie on its head and have 6 male journalism students go into the same cave to investigate what happened to the women on their trip. This changed quite a bit, even though Marshall doesn't have any credits in the creative process. It seemed like he helped shape what was eventually to come. Sarah makes it out of the ordeal, picking a definitive ending of the 2 for the original, and the local police make her go back down into the cave to show them what happened and find any survivors. Well, of course they do find survivors, but not the ones they want, and the group, which includes 3 cave divers, 2 officers, and Sarah, run afoul of the cave dwellers again after coming down through the mine shaft with the help of a local old man. The movie follows a very similar path with nightmares, hallucinations, cave-ins, misdirection, and sudden bursts of violence. While this is all a little bit derivative of the first film, the movie has more going for it than I think a lot of people are willing to give it credit for. The original cast of exploring women friends was originally supposed to come back in the form of hallucinations, ghosts, and flashbacks, but during productions, it was decided to use them to expand the videos found on the video cameras left in the cave. This works pretty well, and we also get to see the bodies in some cases where they were killed, and that adds to the lived-in feel of the original. Therein lies my biggest problem with The Descent Part 2. Let's look at the bad first. While there were only 18 cave sets built for the first movie, a total of 30 are here for Part 2, and they look great. Until they don't. There are a couple of scenes here where it stands out badly both technically and practically. While it's not as obvious as some of the Puppet Master movies using the same damn hallway over and over again, it still is noticeable in a way that the first one isn't, with fewer options no less. On top of that, there are a couple scenes where it's clear that there are some digital effects at play. Whether or not these could have been cleaned up, it stands out like a sore thumb. The cast is just, well, they're not as compelling as the first movie either. While Shauna McDonald comes back as Sarah and is great, the rest of the cast feels like meat to be eaten, and they don't resonate with the viewer nearly as much as the group of close-knit friends do in the first movie. McDonald has never been better than the first film, but check out Filth with James McAvoy to see another great, albeit non-horror, performance. Kristen Cummings, Gavin O'Herlihy, Douglas Hodge, Joss Dallas, and Anna Skirlam round out the rest of the cast. This was Skellern's first movie, and while she doesn't have anything else big to her name, she appears in what looks like a ton of straight-to-video horror. This was an early role for Josh Dallas, but he would go on to appear in Marvel's Thor and make it big on TV as Prince Charming in Once Upon a Time and Ben in Manifest. Hodge is a wonderful English actor who was in Penny Dreadful for a bit, and recently Alfred in Joker, not the new bad sequel. Crystal Cummings only has 2 other credits to her name, and Gavin O'Herlihy is the son of RoboCop and Halloween 3 great Dan O'Herlihy. This was his last role, but his career was more varied than you remember, with roles alongside Superman and James Bond to name a few. While everyone apart from McDonald is underwhelming, this could also be due to the abundance of writers. As I said earlier, Marshall declined to come back in a creative role, so they replaced him with 3 writers in James McCarthy, Jay Blakeson, and James Watkins. The team of Triple J has a small but interesting list of credits between them. Blakeson wrote and directed the underrated thriller The Disappearance of Alice Creed, while Watkins has had the largest impact, directing Eden Lake, Woman in Black, and most recently, Speak No Evil. Man, this episode has James McAvoy sneaking in a lot here. While this would be the only directorial credit for Harris, he does a fine job and also edited his own work, which helps. Other than the previously mentioned grievances with acting and some effects, the biggest issue with this movie is that it's a sequel to The Descent. That's the whole reason that Marshall didn't want to return in the first place. And you know what? He isn't exactly wrong. I think this movie would have been more compelling not as a sequel, but as a standalone, where maybe we didn't see what happened to these women in the first place. What if their bodies were found and we didn't get a full explanation, or maybe we were only shown what could be found on the tapes? It would have given back the mystery and luster that made the original so enthralling and scary. Taken as is, it still works. The practical gore effects look great from the bodies found, with rats crawling out of orifices and throats getting torn out. We also get hands getting cut off. It's suitably gross, almost in a way that wasn't offered previously. The new creatures are also more detailed and more disgusting, while also showing us female versions explaining how they remain a population, as well as child ones and a hulking chieftain of sorts. While the movie follows a lot of the same beats from the first one, it also has a couple standout scenes, with my favorite being a tight tunnel game of chicken where Sarah takes out a crawler barreling towards her while also escaping into a hole. The first movie made $57 million on a $3.5 million budget with great audience scores and even better critical praise, but this movie, well, it only made $7 million in its limited release, and I can't even find its budget. It just came out the wrong time and maybe had the wrong idea. It negates a great original ending while also waiting an odd amount of time to be released. Not soon enough to really go after the crowds that adored the original, and not nearly long enough to have proper nostalgia for a revisit.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
The Descent Part 2 sits in a rather lost position in horror, with its timing being around mostly forgotten entries flooded with remakes, sequels, and original fare that just fell flat. While it may not be the best movie ever, an obvious statement if there ever was one, it overcomes a lot of its missteps to be worth your time. The sameness of the original, dumb ending, questionable effects at times don't wipe away the good gore, fun creatures, and great central performance. If you've been avoiding it or let your memories spoil the experience, it's high time you strapped a flashlight to your helmet and jump back into the cave to see what you're missing.